Among the most luxurious trains ever to grace the British Railways network, the Blue Pullman sets were a series of express services that operated between London, Bristol, Birmingham, South Wales and Manchester, delivering the highest standards of comfort for the wealthy business passenger. Sadly, despite their many achievements, the opulent Blue Pullman sets quickly fell from favour, and after only 13 years of operation, these bespoke train sets had disappeared from the railway scene, the result of poor planning and management by the British Railways executive staff. The tale of the Blue Pullman begins in 1955 with the modernisation plan, as drafted by British Railways, to replace thousands of steam locomotives with a mixture of electric and diesel traction, with Western Region manager H. Phillips pushing forward the possibility of examining a diesel express passenger train, with input provided from the British Transport Commission's technical departments, the Pullman Car Company, and the BTC Hotels and Catering Services. Trouble immediately brewed, though, when the Pullman Car Company, which was based in London, objected to the idea that the new service would be headquartered outside the capital, but their objections were overruled by the British Transport Commission, who had purchased the firm in 1954. The project called for the creation of at least 3 fixed-rake diesel multiple units fitted with lavish Pullman car interiors that would operate on both the Midland and Western Regions, the concept proposing to undertake the Manchester Central to London St Pancras run in approximately 3 hours, providing a rail-based alternative to domestic air services while delivering for business travellers opulent levels of luxury. Production of these sets was handed to the Metro Camel Company, with the trains to be assembled at their Washwood Heath factory in the West Midlands, while the styling was penned by Jack Hoe, who had made the early choice of abandoning the traditional Pullman chocolate and cream livery for a Nanking blue, its name derived from the colour of Chinese pottery. The reasons as to adopting Nanking blue, thus giving rise to the moniker of the Blue Pullman, was done simply to give these trains a unique look when compared to the now severely faded liveries of contemporary steam and diesel-hauled expresses. The Blue Pullman sets were powered by NBL MAN V12 supercharged diesel engines, which produced 1,000 horsepower, propelling the trains to a top speed of 90 miles an hour, with the sets comprising 2 power cars with either 4 or 6 intermediate trailers. The 6-car sets were designated to the Midland region, and consisted of 2 trailer firsts, 2 first kitchens, and 2 driving motor brake firsts, while 8-car sets, designated for the Western region, incorporated an additional 2 second-class coaches positioned behind the power cars, while the power cars themselves could accommodate up to 12 passengers aft of the engine bay. Internally, these trains were lavishly appointed, with the most luxurious materials and bespoke fixtures used to truly give the Pullman experience, including decorative rosewood and ebony veneers, grey plastic hide, plastic facings, and contrasting seat upholstery. Sets were fully air-conditioned with automatic humidity control, while huge amounts of padding and insulated suspended floors reduced the noise level to a whisper, and the windows were double-glazed to prevent condensation and improve insulation and noise reduction, with a small Venetian blind fitted between the 2 double-glazed window panes that could be lowered and angled by small handles adjacent to the passenger seat. All seats followed an armchair design, with cushions made of foam rubber upholstered in red or blue striped fabric, as trimmed with a black and grey plastic hide, while the seating arrangement itself was all tables with corresponding table lamps and could also be reclined using a button control, as well as being placed on runners so they could slide back and forth for extra legroom. Each seating berth included an attendant summon button, which would turn on a small green lamp above the table to indicate to staff where they were needed, supported by a buzzer in the corridor to notify train crew who weren't inside the cabin area, and bathrooms were gender segregated to include ladies' and gentlemen's toilets, featuring towel dispensers and hygienic spray washing facilities, which gave an automatically timed flow of water, of which the temperature could be regulated as required. Each set came with 2 kitchen cars, which were arranged to make the best use of the limited internal space, while also being furnished to maintain a minimum standard of hygiene, the equipment including a gas cooker, a water boiler, a fridge and a freezer, all made of stainless steel, while 4 extractor fans helped to vent out smoke and steam. In total, 5 Blue Pullman sets were built by Metro Camel, amounting to 36 vehicles overall, the 2 6-car sets going to the Midland region, and the 3 8-car sets being allocated to the Western region, with the original proposed introduction of Blue Pullman sets into service being planned for October 1959, but due to production delays, this was pushed back to 1960. The first set emerged from the factory in October 1959 and began a series of intensive tests on the London Midland region around Birmingham, followed by long-distance trials from November between Leicester and Luton, but it was soon discovered that the Blue Pullman sets had an atrocious ride at high speed, due to faults with the European-derived bogies that were not suited to the British trackwork. Though attempts to mitigate the rough riding were implemented, these trains would be burdened with poor ride quality throughout their entire working lives, while other teething problems meant that the scheduled introduction of Blue Pullmans on January 4, 1960 came and went, with trials continuing to take place well into June of that year. Eventually, after a press launch and VIP trip on June 24, 1960, the Blue Pullman made its inaugural run on the Midland region from London St Pancras to Leicester on July 1st, the launch train, formed of 6 coaches, being complimented for its comfort and performance. Intentions were to introduce a full passenger service from July 4th, but problems were further raised by the National Union of Railwaymen, or NUR, who protested the plan to operate diesel-electric passenger trains under the Pullman brand, as they believed that the Pullman Car Company was still a private entity, even though it had been completely bought out by BTC in 1954. The NUR considered that these trains would be staffed by Pullman Company workers, who operated under different working conditions to those of regular BR staff, while also fearing that the introduction of a restaurant service between London and Manchester on the Blue Pullman would result in the removal of the restaurant service on the regular British Rail trains, causing possible redundancies for BR restaurant car workers. The matter of union relations for the Blue Pullman would only be resolved when the BTC allowed BR staff to work the Blue Pullman trains, but would provide their service under the practices and uniform of the Pullman Car Company. In the end, the Midland Pullman began regular passenger operation on July 23rd, working from London St Pancras via the Midland Main Line through Leicester and Derby, before joining the South Manchester Line via Chinley and Cheadle Heath to reach the former Midland Railway terminus at Manchester Central, while stabling and maintenance would be undertaken at the Reddish Motive Power Depot on the outskirts of Stockport. Service patterns for the Midland Pullman consisted of 2 through trains between London St Pancras and Manchester Central per day, Mondays to Fridays, with only 1 intermediate stop at Cheadle Heath for the benefit of Manchester's suburban population, while during the off-peak period, 1 Midland set would run a midday service from London to Leicester, returning to London in time for the evening train back to Manchester. The Midland Pullman, however, once again garnered criticism due to the scheduling of the morning train, which left Manchester at 08:50 and arrived into London at 12:03, far too late for morning commuters. Thus BR revised the timetable from January 1961 to an 07:45 departure, arriving into London at 11 a.m. Furthermore, the revised time also included the extension of the midday Pullman service from Leicester to Loughborough and Nottingham, the turnaround times at London St Pancras being made accordingly tighter, but this again incurred the wrath of the NUR, who considered the turnaround times to be far too short for a suitable break. This, in combination with the lack of ridership, saw an end to the midday Pullman service in mid-1961, while the evening train, on the other hand, was much more appropriate for commuters, departing London at 18:10 and arriving into Manchester at 21:21, the onboard dinner service being ideal for homeward-bound business travellers. On the Western region, this service commenced on September 12, 1960, and consisted of 1 train, the Birmingham Pullman, to Wolverhampton Low-Level via Leamington, Solihull and Birmingham Snow Hill, while the second, the Bristol Pullman, would travel to Bristol Temple Meads on 2 out-and-back services per day, 1 via Bath Spa and the other via the faster non-stop route through Chipping Sodbury. To this end, the 07:45 Bristol to London service and the 16:55 London to Bristol service, the primary trains for commuters, operated non-stop, doing the run in 1 hour and 50 minutes, while the lower-demand midday service ran via Bath Spa and completed the journey in 1 hour and 55 minutes, but this was later amended from October 1960 to make Bath a compulsory stop. Similarly, for the Birmingham Pullman, this would leave Wolverhampton at 0700 and arrive into London at 09:35, before returning on a midday out-and-back service to Birmingham Snow Hill, and then an evening express at 16:50 back to Wolverhampton Low Level, arriving at 19:20. In the summer of 1961, an extra service was introduced for the Western region in the form of the South Wales Pullman, a morning service that operated between London Paddington, Cardiff and Swansea, completing the journey in 4 hours and 20 minutes. However, the somewhat bespoke nature of the Blue Pullman sets didn't sit well with the Western region management, and thus a steam-hauled rake of older Pullman coaches, later diesel-hauled, was kept on standby at Old Oak Common and could easily spring into action in the event of a Blue Pullman set breaking down. Despite their exclusivity, the Blue Pullman services did make a profit, with its operational costs being approximately £207 per train mile, which compared favourably to loco-hauled services at £208, while the average fare for the Blue Pullman was £35 per passenger, or £696 in 2024. This was a cost passengers were evidently willing to pay, as in 1964, the Birmingham Pullman, among the fastest trains between the West Midlands and London, carried 157,000 passengers, while the Bristol Pullman carried 134,000 passengers, and the South Wales Pullman carried 104,000. Sadly, in spite of the Blue Pullman's rocky start into service, the longevity of these trains, especially the Midland and Birmingham Pullman, was curtailed upon the electrification of the West Coast Main Line between London Euston, Birmingham, Crewe, Manchester and Liverpool, with a new fleet of 100-mile-an-hour AC electric locomotives being delivered to provide the fastest expresses at work in the UK. In 1965, the last section of the electrification to London Euston was completed, and coinciding with the delivery of the brand new AL6, later Class 86 electric locomotives, British Rail launched the Manchester Pullman in 1966, which comprised an all-first-class operation utilising the brand new Mark II carriages, and were able to do the London to Manchester run in a mere 2 hours and 30 minutes. The electrification of the line to Birmingham New Street and Wolverhampton High Level also doomed the Birmingham Pullman, as electric operations, which commenced in March 1967, could do the Wolverhampton to London run in just over 2 hours, while the Blue Pullman did the journey via Banbury in 2 hours and 35 minutes. Thus, that same month, both the Midland and Birmingham Pullman services were axed, and all 5 of the Blue Pullman sets were allocated to the trunk route of the former Great Western Railway between London, Bristol and Cardiff, although plans were made to introduce a Pullman train on the East Coast Main Line between London King's Cross and Leeds, and on the Golden Hind service to Penzance, neither of which came to fruition. Initially, the former Midland Pullman sets were put to work on a new non-stop Oxford Pullman service, which commenced in March 1967, as well as allowing for additional diagrams on the Bristol and South Wales Pullmans, but due to capacity issues on the 6-car trains, the 2 ex-Midland sets were coupled together to form a 12-car unit between London and Reading, one set travelling to Oxford and the other to either Bristol or Swansea. This operation would last until October 1971, after which the 36 vehicles of the 5 Blue Pullman sets were reorganised to create 8-car trains, while redundant power cars were either kept as spares donors or put into storage. Aside from their use exclusively on the Great Western Main Line, Blue Pullman sets were also put to work on rail tours from the late 1960s, including a run to Derby to serve the Grand National, a tour between Surbiton and South Wales in April 1970, a spectator tour to Newbury Racecourse in August of the same year, and a run on Christmas Eve 1970 between London and Plymouth. The biggest concern when operating these 5 non-standard train sets, though, was their maintenance, as since there were so few of these bespoke units in service with British Rail, spare parts were kept to an absolute minimum to avoid significant expense, which caused severe wear and tear on the sets that led mostly to fatigue failures in the bogie frames. Eventually, as BR undertook a massive downsizing of its vast array of locomotives and stock, the Blue Pullmans were highlighted for their non-standard design and continuing maintenance cost, and thus the announcement was made on November 20, 1972, that the Blue Pullman sets would be withdrawn, with the final services taking place on May 4, 1973. However, a final rail tour was performed the following day, that ran out and back from London Paddington via High Wycombe, Banbury, Leamington Spa, Coventry, Birmingham New Street, Cheltenham, Bristol Temple Meads, Cardiff and Swansea, before returning back to London via Bristol Parkway, Didcot and Reading, the train making an additional unscheduled stop at Neath near Swansea when an elderly gentleman accidentally boarded the train. With the farewell tour, all sets were withdrawn and scrapped, although some of the power cars were kept at Bristol Bath Road Depot for use as emergency generators during the coal miners' strikes of December 1973, remaining there until July 1974, and despite interest being shown for their purchase by the Yugoslavian railways, all vehicles and artefacts of the Blue Pullmans were dismantled. Since then, the Blue Pullman has been recreated on 2 occasions, the first being between January 2006 and February 2007, when 2 Class 47s, 47709 and 712, with matching Mark II coaches, were operated on various luxury charters by FM Rail, but these ceased when the company went into administration at the end of 2006. The second reincarnation of the Blue Pullman was undertaken by Locomotive Services Limited, who acquired former East Midlands Railway high-speed train sets, including various Class 43 power cars, to run a Midland Pullman luxury charter train from the start of 2021, with this 9-car set now being a regular and popular fixture across the entire UK rail network. Overall, the Blue Pullman sets, while among the most famous and luxurious trains ever to run on Britain's railways, were a victim of their own exclusivity, being expensive to maintain and operate, while also hampered by poor management and unfavourable timetabling. However, during their brief existence, these trains were able to leave an influential mark on the history of Britain's railways, and continue to hold a strong legacy in the UK's transport culture, so much so that their name survives in the lovingly restored Midland Pullman service as operated by their spiritual successor.